Hello friend, and welcome back to this Linocut reduction printing process. And this is all about bats, as you can see, and as the previous video hopefully made clear. If you didn't get a chance to see how I got the artwork onto this block, I will leave a link in the description as ever. But in this stage it's all about starting the serious and rather long-winded business of slowly and oh so very carefully taking away all this material around the artwork. And I'm starting with the outline. I'm going to have this essentially ground colour of sort of dark green turquoise, and all the highlights picked out in white, just using the white of the paper I'm going to be printing on itself. And then the line work will just be black ink essentially. So I'm just speeding things up a bit here because we don't want to be here all day, do we? It is lovely spending time together, but seriously, there is a lot of this to get through. So I'm just speeding away. I'm using a large v-gouge here. These were sort of not very expensive, middle of the range Korean carving tools that I've got here. I shall try and find a link to these and put those in the description for you as well, because I highly recommend them. I'm not labouring too much on the details at this point, but I'm just using that nice sharpness from the v-gouge to take away the material around some of the details that are just edging over that background, that sort of ground mass that I'm going around and around at the moment. Essentially what I need to do is create a nice thick outline, which is essentially a buffer zone, so that when I get to clearing all of the white space around that, which is essentially everything stretching all the way from that block of colour. Here we go. My glamorous assistant Tolly here believes that it's very important to take breaks when you're working so hard, especially when they involve stroking him under his chinny chin. So I think it's time for us to go and have a little cup of tea, and we will come back to this presently, won't we? Yes. Yes, we will. Anyway, now that we are refreshed, I've had my Tolly-break, we can crack on. And here I'm just using a large flat gouge to try and just take away some of the hard edges around the block. I don't actually find this big sort of flat one very useful, so I quite quickly end up going back to I think what a U-gouge now. It's a shame. I would have thought that the big flat one would have been more useful, but no, I've yet to find a really good application for it. And yeah, I can't afford to muck about experimenting too much with this one, because as you can see, there is a lot of white space that I need to carve away, and here you can see the value of going around the outsides of the line work first, just to create that that sort of trench, if you like, that outline with the V tool earlier. So now I can just get into the flow of carving away strips from this area, which is just going to be white space. I don't want anything printing on this. And pew 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 pew. God, look at her go. Needless to say, I think this is sped up to about at least 10 times, possibly more like 15. because, yeah, there's a lot of ground to cover. What was I saying? Can't remember. Oh well, on we go. Yeah, I'm just doing one pass over this initially. I'm going to need to take this material down quite a lot further because quite often I like a bit of chatter. Oh, see how much mess I've made already. Such a mucky pup. God, he can't take me anywhere. Okay, I think that is a good place to pause for a little bit of tool care. This is the important bit. It's not the most fun bit, if I'm honest, but it is important. So I'm just charging up my slipstrop with the yellow chalky compound just to hone the tools that I've been using for this first pass. Just keeping everything nice and sharp for the next round. Hey, where do you think you're going? Get back with the others. Right. Speaking of the next round, I did go in and take down the ground mass a little bit further in between shooting, but frankly I thought that was a bit too boring. You know what I'm doing with the background, and it's way more interesting to get into actually carving out the white space in the artwork itself. So I'm just going around the main bat in the middle, the focal point really for the whole piece, with the smallest, finest v-gouge tool that I have in my arsenal. Just speeding things up a little bit there. This tool, I find, because it is so very fine, is great for doing outlines that I can then use as a guide for using my larger tools so that they don't accidentally slip and go over the artwork. But apart from some finer details, it's not great for carving in and of itself, because it's so fine it just digs straight into the material, and I end up piercing it rather than carving it in the way that I would like. So I tend to use it a lot like this, just to clear those delicate areas so that I can then go in with something larger and a bit more decisive. And the V tool that I have, the larger one, should interpolate quite nicely with all of the trenches that this finer tool is picking out here. And that's what I am doing now. So just, as you can see, using that outline to guide my hand with the larger tool without too much fear of messing up that very delicate line work around the bat's toesies. They are very delicate, I have to say. Slowing things down a bit so we can appreciate just how slow I have to go with some of these. Fortunately, we don't have to go that slow on the video. That's the magic of cinema, baby. Okay, so just taking out the white space for the moon. We've got a lovely full fat full moon. So I just want to concentrate on clearing these blocks of white space and getting all the strongest shapes in the first instance. I'm still using my smaller v-gouge to carve away those outlines around the bat itself, because again I want to preserve all of that detail as much as possible. Now, I apologise for the state of my fingernails in some of these shots. I do quite a lot of baking, and we've also been doing a lot of DIY work recently, so I don't know what that white gunk is under my nails right now. It could be bread dough, it could be paint, it could be plaster, could be anything really. Sorry about that. And here I'm really going as carefully as possible around all that fine detail, carving not over the lines but just outside of them, because I want to preserve that line work and make it as strong as possible. So if in doubt around especially these very fine focal areas around the face, I always err on the side of caution. It's better to carve on the outside and work your way in, if that makes sense. And especially around the claws and the teeth and all those needly little areas. So now that's done, I'm just going in with the large v-gouge and opening those outlines up a bit, getting into all those awkward little corners around the face. I will want to keep those forms as sharp and as strong and striking as possible. And once I've got these outlines all carved out nicely, then I can concentrate on clearing most of the white space in the moon without worrying too much about going over the line work by accident or anything like that. As ever, I do try to move the block around as much as possible rather than my wrist when I'm going around curved edges. I just find that gives me a bit more control of what I'm doing, and it's a bit easier on the wrists as well, especially when you're working on a piece as large and detailed as this. It's not an exceptionally large image, it's only A4, pretty standard, but there is a lot of detail in there, and this process requires quite a lot of precision, and precision takes time and care. I'm just starting to work on the highlights now. I skipped over some of the clearing out of the moon because I thought we don't see that in its entirety. You get the idea. But now we're down to what feels more like drawing, really, with my very fine v-gouge. Having got that lovely, big, clear, very strong outline of the moon in the background, what I'm trying to do now really is try and bring some finesse into all the forms that we have in the image. And I'm just going in again with my finest v-gouge and plucking out these little moths that the Serotine bats are hunting tonight. And this is a very delicate process. I want these, for the most part, just to be white silhouettes, whereas the bats will have sort of fringe lighting, essentially picking out all their details. So this little fellow in the corner has the light source coming from above. So I'm just very slowly, very gently carving away all those edges that are closest to the light source, closest to the moon. And again on this fellow down here. When you're using a sort of more traditional battleship grey lino, you can see the highlights coming out as you're carving. And with reduction print, you only really start to see that on this kind of soft cut material after you've printed the first layer, because the inks will slightly stain the surface. So it's a little bit tricky when you're doing the first round like this to really see what you're doing with clarity. So if I use this material again, I may just stain the surface before I start with a little bit of ink, just to help these come out a little bit more, and it will show up better in the footage as well when I'm filming. So now I'm just going into all the raised sort of flaps of skin that are stretched across the arms and the digits. I'm really hoping to convey that translucency in a bat's wings at the moment, because we just have the low lights and shadows essentially picked out in biro, just acting as a guide for me really to show where the strong sort of struts and elements are in the wing. It all looks a little bit solid, but as I'm going in and carving away the highlights with my very fine v-gouge, hopefully that translucency will start to come through. I'm trying to get some highlights into the furry little bodies as well here, just picking out those raised areas that haven't been picked out in the line work, but I've had this picture in my head from the moment when I started the drawing of where the lowlights and the highlights will ultimately be. But they only really come to the fore once I actually start carving. And that again is one of the really rewarding things about Linocut printing, or any kind of relief printing really, that, as I've said in previous videos, the image that you have in your head and the image that you first start out with in the drawing are not the finished article. Everything reveals itself gradually as you're working on it. And images really do take on a life of their own as you're working on them. This is the bit that I have been putting off for quite some time because it just feels like it's fraught with danger, carving my insignia into the bottom here. And I think it feels fraught for me because it's the only inorganic, straight-edged thing that you will ever see in any of the prints that I make. So I just need all of the edges to be nice and neat, not raggedy, and well aligned to the paper when I print. Ah, finally, some brains in this operation. I was wondering when you were going to turn up. And remind me that it's time to tickle your chinny chin chin. Oh yeah. So now we're going to start printing, and I'm using Cranfield Caligo Safe Wash inks for this. So they're oil based, but they are water soluble, so a bit less messy. I want the global colour of this image to be a sort of dusky turquoise, so I'm just mixing some white with process blue and yellow and adding a little bit of ink extender there just to give a bit of translucency and to help to bulk out the volume of the ink a little bit. So I'm mixing it as thoroughly as I can as I go, and I will adjust as needed. It's a little bit blue for my liking, so I'm adding a bit more of the yellow just to make it a bit more greenish. And I always keep some baby wipes handy when I'm printing, just to avoid any messy sticky fingers. And I'm siphoning a little bit off here and adding some more white to it, just so that I can compare and contrast, experiment a little bit with the hue that I end up with. I want these, as I say, to be a bit dusky, not too vibrant, so I'm just going to mute them with a teensy bit of black ink just to grey them out a little bit. This is meant to be a nighttime image, so we want a little bit of that blackness in there. Just adding a bit more of the extender here to both of these. The extender helps to bulk out the ink a little bit and helps it to flow with a lovely translucency. I'm just going to add a little bit of wax dryer now that I'm happy with that. I'm adding only a teensy amount of the wax dryer because you only need about 3% in the mix. This dryer will just help to accelerate the drying process a little bit because I will need to hang these to dry for a few days, and having something that will just help to speed that up will help enormously. So now I just need to take a little bit of ink and work it around with my roller. I have a soft rubber roller here, which I'm just working vertically and horizontally and taking care to lift it away from my palette occasionally so that I get a nice even coverage, not just on the palette itself, but crucially on the roller, because obviously that's going to transfer onto my block. I'm just working methodically, keeping the layers of ink themselves very thin, but then layering up as much as I feel I need. So I'm just going to speed things up a little bit here because you get the idea. We don't need to see all of this in real time. I'm just going in with a baby wipe just to remove some little bits of ink that have caught on the raised edges. I'm just using a set square that I borrowed from my partner for the registration for this one. The block that I have is exactly the same size as the paper that I want to print to, so I don't need a sort of fancy registration setup really for these. And I've just got this clean roller, which is much harder than the rubber roller that I use for printing, just to act as a brayer to apply some even pressure over a large surface. And I'm just gradually peeling away to check these prints as I go. The first couple of prints are normally duffers. They're sacrificial prints, and just to essentially work the ink over the block and over my roller, and I can use these to see where troublesome areas might be. Even though I did sand my block down initially in the previous video before starting the carving, I'm still seeing some inconsistencies with the texture, but at least they look quite organic. I think one more print and yeah, I think we can get away with that. I do like a bit of texture on prints, and I like a little bit of chatter just outside of the boundaries of the artwork, so I'm not being too detailed with cleaning up everything all around the area that I'm actually inking, but I want to minimize it and get everything as consistent and clean as possible. Oh yes, now we're getting there. I'm happy with that. So now it's just wash, rinse and repeat. Wash, rinse and repeat jobby until I run out of ink and paper, essentially. Fortunately, I don't do very extensive runs. We're only going to be doing about 10 or so limited edition prints of this design, so we shan't be here for too long. Thank you so much for spending time with me today. Tolly and I have very much enjoyed hanging out doing printing with you, and we hope to see you again in the next episode for carving and printing the second layer. We'll see you then. Take care.